Welcome to Uncover the Human, where every conversation revolves around enhancing all the connections in our lives.
Whether that's with our families, co-workers, or even ourselves.
When we can be our authentic selves, magic happens. This is Alex Cullimore.
And this is Christina Amigoni. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. Today, Christina and I are joined by our guest, Michael Fryer. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thanks so much, Christina. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, to give people a little context, what's your background and what brought you here?
I have spent the last 27 years working with people experiencing conflict, disagreement, tension in a fascinating range of contexts. I've often felt that I have what could best be described as electrician envy. So when someone asks, what do you do for a living? It would be so easy to say, I'm an electrician. Trying to define what I've done over the years has been complex because it's been so varied. I'd say the best word to describe what I do is accompaniment. So I see myself as someone who accompanies people who are seeking a better, healthier understanding of why disagreement, tension is present, and then try and help guide people to an understanding that maybe they've just not seen, or a way of thinking that's just not become clear. And then just kind of that accompaniment. It's also, I think the reason I like the word accompaniment is it's a more authentic description of power dynamics. This is not about me as an outside consultant or educator coming in, telling someone what they should think or what they should do. I ask questions which help guide people into an understanding of their own reality. And there's value, I think, of doing that from an outside perspective. So that's basically my kind of line. And I've done it in various forms. I've been until recently, I was working full-time as a teaching at a graduate school, teaching classes such as mediation, negotiation, organizational conflict. I've worked in Northern Ireland, Sri Lanka, various different conflict situations, kind of doing dialogue, reconciliation work. But ultimately, it's about humans. It's about people who are struggling to understand where someone else is coming from or where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's needed at all. We all get along so well all the time. No misunderstandings in communication with humans.
Never.
Everybody totally understands all the time. That's a great word, accompaniment. That really is, it's both active and is nice. It's a much better, like, people use the word partnering so much nowadays, and it does apply well, but because it's so overused, it can be very saturated. And I like that accompaniment idea, where there is that sounding board and something that is necessary to kind of pull off, to have an extra perspective there, so that you can have a greater understanding. What kind of got you into that idea that it should be, an accompaniment and something that should be together?
It's a great question. I think in many ways, it was a frustration with how it was expressed in other ways. So I kind of, from an education point of view, I always valued teachers who brought a respectful understanding of their place in the space. So as an educator, as a workshop facilitator, what we do is we intentionally create a space. And in that space, we invite conversations. So there's a different, I heard listening to an Irish podcast, the Almanac of Ireland, a presenter called Mancorn Magan. Recently, he was having a conversation with an English storyteller called Martin Shaw. And Martin Shaw said, because I love stories, and this was about stories, Martin Shaw, was a storyteller, said, when a story is shared, the typical but very limiting question to ask an audience or people hearing it afterwards is, what was that story about? The problem with that is it emphasizes, encourages a single interpretation, or makes people think, okay, there's a right or a wrong answer here. what Martin Shaw said is the much better question, and I love this question. After a story, you say, where did you find yourself in that story? And when you ask, where did you find yourself in that story, you invite however many people are in the room to share their own experience. It's a much more respectful and invitational, and stories beget stories. And one thing I've learned over the years is just I have a genetic gift for stories. I think it's rooted in my Irish heritage and ancestry. But the stories, when you in a learning space, and this is going like your question about accompaniment and being alongside someone, when you recognize in the room there is an inherent wisdom. And it's the complete opposite of the traditional, typical knowledge transfer that characterizes, still, unfortunately, so much of an academic context. So I'm the expert, and it's typically someone who looks like me, who will impart their great wisdom, and students or participants will furiously write down all the answers. And that's not how we learn as humans. It's just not how we learn.
Yeah. We definitely relate to that. When we try to explain what the experience is like, or even what we do to associates or people who may join us in the facilitation pieces, there's a big emphasis when we talk to them about how we don't go into lecture. We don't go into tell people what to do. We create a space and provide information and questions and experiences that invite learning, and each learning is going to be different by the individual in the room. We can't force anything down anybody's throat. And it's amazing. It's a big shift, because even people that have been in the learning and development world have a hard time understanding, like, wait, well, but I'm standing up and telling them. And I'm like, no, you can't tell them how to resolve conflict. No, that's not how this works.
You can ask good questions. And that's what I think that's the role of the facilitator. And Christine, can I just ask you, what is the Italian word for easy?
Facile.
Yeah, as in French.
Facilitate. Yeah.
The facilitator.
You facilitate
something easier.
Yeah.
It's a difficult situation. We don't understand what's going on. Facilitator comes in and shapes and frames the conversation in a way that makes things easier to understand. That's all we do.
Yes.
And it's very simple, but I think it can be done. I've seen a lot of bad examples of facilitation and teaching, and they're all rooted in the professor, the facilitator, the whoever's leading the space. It's rooted in their insistence that the group goes in the direction they want it to go.
Yes.
And when something comes in from the group that's not fitting that path, then they just ignore it and they just plow on, and it's not meeting what the group needs. And so that real genius. And I remember, this is kind of going back to the stories, one of the most powerful memories in terms of my professional life was back in the late 1990s, and I was working at a peace and reconciliation center in Northern Ireland called the Corrymeela community. It was where I learned my trade in many ways. It was founded in 1965. It intentionally created a space for people with different identities to explore who they were and who they were in relation to the others. And she's still a great friend and mentor, Mary Montague, who was one of the, I think she ran the family programs at Corrymeela. And we were sitting down, there was a group arriving. So it was a residential space. There were groups from the Catholic side, from the Protestant side, and they were coming together for the first time. Now, Mary had been working with them simultaneously for about 6 months, because they learned, Corey Miller learned in the 1970s that the basic idea of contact hypothesis, as in bringing two groups together who disagree on lots of things and giving them a shared focus, will help them develop positive relationships. It only works until the controversial topic comes up. And then you have a classic tribal split. So what they would do is they would work on what was known as single identity work. They would work in parallel processes with both groups, building up confidence, building up trust in the process, and then eventually, with full transparency about what was going to be happening, bringing them together. On this particular morning, Mary sat down the small team who were going to be working with the group together, and she said, I've been working on this program for the last 6 months. There was a shooting, some violence in the area where these groups are coming from last night. Because of that, this program, she held up the itinerary. She says, this program is no longer relevant. And she ripped it up. And she threw it to one side and she said, the group are arriving in 2 hours. We need to come up with a new program. And I was amazed. And the reason why I'm sharing this now, kind of 24 years later, is that I'm still so grateful for that commitment to flexibility, to recognize the ground has shifted now. And for us to plow on with this existing plan is irrelevant. And there's the principle of that, I think, is so relevant in organizations. The pandemic was a great example of this. The ground shifted. What we're doing is no longer relevant. How do we adapt? How do we adapt to that change, or a leadership change? It's like that constant change. And so that commitment to flexibility, I think, is so valuable.
That's a great example. And it's a visceral one just to tear up the entire program right there. We've had to do this one on the fly, and thankfully less extreme circumstances, but we've watched this happen on some of our trainings. There'll be some organizational shift right before we all show up in person. Like, well, this is going to be part of the room anyway. We can either try and ignore that and plow on through, or we bring this up and we actually discuss it and let it be part of what is influencing everybody anyway.
And it's because everybody's aware of it. And so it's like, how do you name what's in the room? And that's again the flexibility. I've done numerous mandatory trainings over the years, typically around issues relating to compliance to a new policy, or exploring issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. The first thing I will do in any mandatory training is welcome people and thank them and say, thank you for being here. I know you're all here because you were told you had to come. And everyone laughs because they know it's true. And then say, you've all got lots of other things that you could be doing right now. And everyone nods because it's true in any workshop. And I'm always conscious of that. Everyone else could be doing something else. And then saying, this is what we're going to do. And this is our aim. We're grateful for your physical presence. We want to make sure that this time is of value. Just naming the reality is it's authentic and people appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much effort is put and energy on not naming what's there when it's in everybody's mind right there. It's like, just say it.
Yeah, but that's why I think it takes great courage to do that. And it's why I think people just get on with it because it's easier to do. There's a great in Colombia, one of the colloquial words for conflict is enredo, so like tangled up, and it's often referred to as like a fishing net that's been tangled up. And I really resonated when I first heard the description. And have used it in workshops to describe conflict. And then one day I had I don't have any experience with large fishing nets, but I think everybody has the experience of reaching their hand into their backpack or their pocket and pulling out headphones which somehow have been
Yeah.
knotted into a complex bundle. And you just look at it, and that's enredo. That's conflict. So when we bring into a space an image or a story that helps people understand what they're experiencing, and then tie it with the authenticity, because the authentic, the realistic approach that I have to that type of headphone situation is to just look at it and go, oh, it'll do fine. I've got a pocket. I'll put my phone in my pocket and I'll just stretch it out. It doesn't look very good, but it works.
Yeah.
And that's often the case in conflict. Or we look at it, we go, oh, it's fine. It's not too bad. Because the time consuming process of trying to untangle it is there's costs to it. The fascinating thing about actually physically untangling headphones is that they, once it's back to normal, the fascinating thing is that they retain the memory of their previous entanglement.
Yes.
They want to go back into the kinks, and that's very much like an organization who is experiencing this. Like, you can go through a training, you can go through a new process, but it's just there, the memories it built. So I think that's the going back to the accompaniment. I think the real value and what I will try and do when I'm working with a client or a group is to move beyond the one-off type of engagement. I think there's so much more value in a regular, shorter type of conversation where you just, okay, how are things going? Okay, where are the kind of the emerging, recurring tensions, complexities, and you kind of guide people in that, because just the one-off thing, whilst of value, there are significant limitations to that type of approach.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy. Now I'm stuck thinking of the headphones, and it's true. Like, you either just, keep the conflict and put it, close to you so you can still reach your ears, or you give up and you're like, okay, I don't need to listen to music. Or if you really get to that point of frustrating and you're like, no, I actually want to use these, the first usually tendency is to take to the two sides and pull them apart. Which does the opposite, because now the knots get even more tangled and more stubborn. And so if we think about actually resolving the conflict of the headphone strings, we actually have to bring them together and then weave them into each other and into the loops of each other to actually resolve it.
There's one of the things that I've been focusing on recently is basically leading retreats for companies, organizations who are working remotely and who don't have the opportunity to have those types of regular conversations. Because we meet on Zoom and then afterwards we'll stop, and you often miss some of those things. And so there's value in just taking a step back, and the real invitation for a meaningful retreat is to ensure that it's a conversation that it's a series of conversations that aren't just replicating something that would happen in a workplace. And that's sadly what a lot of retreats are. It's just the same conversation that you would have at work. And I think there's the invitation, opportunity is to take a step back and to think, okay, where are we at? Okay, how are we engaged with how we have our mission, we have our vision, we have our goals. Let's have a look at that. And I think that's where going about kind of creating space is really important. I live in a small mountain town called Julian, which is about an hour northeast of San Diego. It used to be a gold mining town, and now it's famous for its apples and apple pies. It's where San Diegans, people from Los Angeles, come for seasons. But I've been partnering with an incredible organization space called the Ilan Lael Foundation, and it's basically the home of a San Diego artist called James Hubble, who's still alive but in his 90s, and is now living down in San Diego. But if people just Google Ilan Lael, ILAN -LAEL, or Jim Hubble architecture, it's incredible architecture. Just like Frank Lloyd Wright meets The Hobbit. The space, and its space matters. It feels different. And so we don't always have an opportunity, as I did a couple of weeks ago, to work with a company who were seeking that type of space. We don't always have that kind of gift. But I think as facilitators, as people working with groups, whether it's even if it's in their own office, we can make the space feel different. And I think we do that by taking an approach that's different to the one that they're expecting.
Yeah, I really like both the metaphor of the headphones in that, as well as the idea of just using the space that's available to you, and that question that you asked at the beginning of like when people tell a story, what is the question that is where do you find yourself in that story? So when people are going to be coming from wherever they are, you can either try and meet them there, or you can pretend like they're not there and they're still going to have to cover that distance to get to whatever conversation might be happening. And that I get a physical space one because it reminds me of like trying to like set up an event or something where there's a column in the middle of the room you didn't know was there. Like, well,
Yeah.
you could either try and ignore it, or you should do something about this.
Or a classic would be lunch arrives early.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just sitting in there, and then these delicious smells are wafting over. Everyone's hungry, and you have to adapt. So you just recognize it. Say, okay, here's lunch. It's hungry, and then you either break early, or I remember one example when I was working at the university in Bradford, my hometown in England, the Peace Studies department, and I was responsible for putting on a workshop for elementary school kids around conflict resolution, that kind of thing. And we were in a large hall, kind of hall where they do commencement. It was a big, big space. So there were lots of different departments. And so I was there exploring emotions and self-awareness and anger stuff, those kind of things. And I was making it as interesting as possible. Sadly, I was across the room from the robotics workshop. So there was the engineering department or something had these really cool robots. And so all of the kids in my workshop were just looking across. And so I just thought, I'm going to lose. I have no chance here. I am going to lose this battle right away. So I just said, okay, there's some fascinating robots. I know everybody's been distracted. Let's go and take a few minutes to go and have a look. And so we walked over, we had a look at it, and then we came back and I said, we've been talking about emotions. We've been talking about how we get frustrated with someone. Has anyone ever deliberately wound up? Anyone got brother or sister? Anyone ever deliberately wound up your brother or sister? Everyone's hand goes up. Okay, so basically, what about your teachers? Can you tell if your teacher's getting frustrated? Yes. What do they do? So they gave a big list of it. And then what's it like for you? It's like a big red button that says do not press. What do you press? What do you do? We press it. And then it's even redder, and it's like neon lights flashing. What do you do? Press it, press it. And so who's controlling the teacher's behavior? Is it you or is it them? Well, it's us. And then it would flip it as far as a brother or sister winding them up. And so basically we're kind of like robots with someone else controlling us. And you see the little light bulbs coming on. But that's I think the invitation of this is just to engage with people where they're at and don't pretend to be that a reality is not there. And that's, I think, and again, people of whatever age value facilitators who just meet them at that kind of space. People don't like being told what to do.
No. They really don't. It's amazing. Yeah, and it doesn't even have to just be an official facilitation. I think if we find a way to meet people where they're at in any conversation, anytime we interact with them, then it completely changes the outcome.
And it's not easy. It really, and that's one of the things. I have a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old, both girls. And one of the things that I've been married for 12 years, and one of the things when I think back to the types of workshops and ideas that I would explore 20 years or so ago, and a heavy emphasis on self-awareness. And I realized I was so naive. I I now have so much deeper understanding of how challenging it is to stay calm when someone's behavior is pushing you. And I think that, and I still fundamentally believe like an ongoing commitment to self-awareness is the foundation of effective conflict resolution, healthy relationships. And so I would often, but it's not easy. It's about paying attention. And so I would often give people homework that most of the times I don't check up on, but it's asking them to write 2 lists. The first list is to write a list of what irritates them, behaviors, frustrations. And if they can't think about what irritates them, I'll invite them, first of all, to think about who irritates them. And then in a non-mafia way, take them out of the picture and kind of just focus on the actual behaviors. And then the second list is, how does your body inform you you're getting frustrated? And so I'll feel a tightness in my chest if I'm feeling kind of frustrated, and but paying attention to that. And then I would often invite people to ask someone who they feel close to, who they trust, who they feel comfortable being vulnerable with, to write a list of how they know that, how the friend knows that they are getting frustrated. And I will bet every penny I ever earn in my life that the other person's list is going to be longer than their list. Because we don't. There was a wonderful Irish writer called John O'Donoghue, who I remember hearing him share this sentence. He said, "I have never seen my own face," which is such a weird sentence, but it's true. I've seen reflections of it. I've seen photos of it. I've seen videos of it, but I've never seen my face in the way that people who I am directly interacting with see it. So we're just not aware of those ways of doing things. So that's really kind of the practice and the kindness to ourselves, the grace. I am my own harshest critic, and everybody hearing this conversation is their own harshest critic.
Yeah.
And so trying to find that kind of the hospitality towards clumsiness. And I think that also manifests in terms of interactions within a team, where someone's especially trying to learn a new language, new way of interacting. And we all have different communication styles. And and that's where we often clash. So respect does not mean the same thing to everybody. So when you talk about reaching, like, kind of identify core needs, you could have something like, listen, I told them exactly what I thought of them, and I told it to their face. How is that not respectful? Because that's someone's core values are around direct communication, about being honest. Whereas somebody else, that's anathema to them. This is like, this is the most hurtful thing anyone could ever have done. And so I think there's the value in encouraging and inviting people to reflect on their own needs, whilst also being compassionate enough and empathetic enough to try and understand where someone else has come from, often leads to, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was important to you. And that's where you have that's the door that opens, and that's the invitation where you can, okay, let's explore that in more detail.
Yeah, it's such great exploration, especially the self-awareness, because a lot of the halfway done self-awareness is like, well, this is how I react, and that's it. Like, well, no, that's not it. That's a good step. And how do you show up? What does that do to others? Like, how do you show up to others? And I have actually just recently had gained, thanks to being accompanied through the journey of that. But I've realized how I look at conflict from a one-on-one perspective, and how I tend to want to resolve anything that could potentially become conflict. As soon as things become a little bit off, I just want to talk about them and resolve them so they don't tangled even more. And my own self-awareness was because I want to do it as fast as possible. I don't leave space for others to not be ready for that.
That's great insights. And it's so, and so we see it in our interactions, our interpersonal relationships. Naturally, they manifest in a professional context. I think they can be slightly different. I think we can make a strategic decision to get in touch with a particular aspect of our communication style. I've always found value in, are you familiar with Mitchell Hammer? It's the intercultural conflict styles inventory. There's lots of different communication conflict style frames out there. I found his particularly helpful. It's just very simple. It's basically, we're either direct communicators or indirect communicators, emotionally restrained or emotionally expressive. And we have a preference. It's not being put in a particular box, but we have a default. The thing that we do when we are, it's the least amount of energy. So I find it, having learned how to drive on the left-hand side of the road, thankfully, everyone will be happy to hear that I drive on the right-hand side of the road here in the US. But if I'm really tired and I come off the highway on an off-ramp and I want to turn left, I have to consciously tell myself, go across and then turn left, because my brain wants to do a tight turn. And so in kind of communication, we can make the effort, but it's what we do when we're the least amount of energy to do it. So one of the things that I've valued from Mitchell Hammer's research and work is, for example, I am an indirect communicating, emotionally restrained. My wife, Vanessa, is external. She's a direct communicating, and she's emotionally expressive. So we have completely different needs in our communication styles. So it could be a case of like 10:30 at night, if there's a conflict that is impacting our personal relationship, there's an immediacy to her particular communication style, as you've just expressed, Christina. It's like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it now. And so her preferred way of doing it at that point is, let's talk about it right now. As an internally processing, indirect communicating, emotionally restrained communicator, the last thing I want to do at 10:30 at night is to talk about a conflict that I am personally involved with. I would rather be in a tent in Siberia, 500 miles away from the closest internet access. I do not want to talk about it at that point in time. What we've learned is, and this is echoed in teams, in healthy teams, is an understanding of our own needs and a willingness to then communicate and share. So in that situation, if Vanessa raises that, says, listen, we'll talk about that, then tapping into my own needs whilst recognizing her needs, I would need to say, listen, I'm exhausted right now. Can we talk about it in the morning? Now, I'll be honest, I don't want to talk about it in the morning. I just want it to go away, because although I love working with people on issues around tension and conflict, personally, I don't like it. I just avoid it, which is not healthy. But then I will commit to that, and then we'll have the conversation. Now, I think the fascinating thing in a team context is a generic meeting, ideas generation, let's explore what's going on. They are dominated by direct communicators, by people who feel very comfortable sharing ideas and exploring ideas, externally processing communicators. And you'll see the classic type of thing where someone who's an internally processing, indirect communicator is really uncomfortable with what's being discussed, but doesn't feel comfortable sharing. And then 3 weeks later, they'll maybe kind of find the courage to say, listen, I was really, I don't think this is a good idea. And I was hesitant about it at the time. And I'm really not sure that this is the way we should be approaching this. And the person who was leading the meeting, who's the direct communicator, well, what? Like, but we had a conversation about this. I clearly remember giving at least 5 seconds for any objections to this proposal to be read, and nobody said it. So I think what like really healthy organizations recognize that there's a huge diversity in terms of how we communicate. And so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about intentionally creating the space. So you recognize those diverse needs and you incorporate into meetings opportunities for people who don't feel comfortable vocalizing their thoughts or who need space to think about it. And it might well be that the direct communicators might say, listen, we have a deadline. We need to make a decision by 5 o'clock. But recognizing that people maybe need space, they said, okay, I'm going to give everyone 30 minutes just to take a break. And then when we come back, we'll go. Now, you could use technology to kind of get ideas shared, etc. But by saying we need to make a decision, I understand that you need space. We need to make a decision at 5 o'clock. That's still honoring the role of leadership. We need to make a decision, but it's recognizing that other people have needs too. And it's that balance, I think, and that's where leadership shapes culture.
It does.
Culture being, this is how things are done around here. This is what's acceptable. This is what's expected. And leadership shapes. So when leadership have the courage to be vulnerable, when someone in leadership is willing to say, actually, let's take a step back, or recognizing those needs, that's where I think you really have healthy cultures.
I love that idea. Just that's much more meeting people where they're at, coming to the individual, finding the space for the different, and with still respect to things like deadlines and decisions that need to be made. And I think that's where people sometimes get hung up. They're like, oh, but we do have to push through for a decision now. Like, yes, and if you don't find space for that, you're going to come up with a half-baked decision, or you're going to come up with one that ends up creating other conflicts. And I'm really hung up on like the next step of that. It feels like a phrase that you used a couple minutes ago that I've just got stuck in my head. The idea of hospitality for clumsiness. That there's everybody's going to have, even with the best intentions, even if you understand all of the enough of the response styles and you give space for response styles in your organization, there's going to be times where it just, there's a mismatch, or the deadline's a little tight or whatever. And some of that hospitality for ourselves and others in there being those bumps. That's what I think a culture can really ignite, when it's not only like there's space, but also we're going to understand that we're going to bump occasionally. And here, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with it when we do inevitably accidentally step on toes and move forward?
So one of the ways I think we can encourage an awareness of that is in the kind of broader kind of peace conflict world, the idea of conflict sensitive planning. It's the idea of being intentional about thinking, okay, here's our plan. This is the strategy. Let's predict the fault lines. There's a phrase which I've been exploring a lot lately, and I don't think I've stolen it, but I may well have done. But it's the idea of avoidable naivety. People will say, well, I didn't know. And my response often is, well, you should have done. If you'd done your homework, and if you'd understood and brought empathy to someone else's position, you could have predicted that would be the resistance that you would meet. And so I think we can learn a lot from weather forecasters. There are patterns within conflicts which recur. You can look at it, you can take a step back and say, okay, these are some of the things. So there are three things that I could guarantee will be a dynamic over the years of doing this. Three things I guarantee I will always encounter. One, there will always be conflict when people are informed about something that they believe they should have been consulted on. Always. An example would be an accounts manager developing a contract with a client, coming up with like, this is what we can offer. Yes, we can do it. And this is the timeline. And then telling the team, the creative people who are having to come up with, say, oh yeah, you're going to be able to, you're going to do this. And you're doing it within 3 weeks. And they're like, what? Are you, like, you've promised this? We've signed the cut. Do you not think maybe we should have been asked already? It's a classic. In a social community dynamic, you see it all the time, where communities are just told this is what's going to happen to you. It's a recognized, you know it's going to happen. A second one would be that in any team where there's tension or conflict within a team, I would be pretty certain that there are some core needs that are not being met. And those would typically be appreciation, acknowledgement, and recognition. So when people just don't feel appreciated, they'll just quit or just feel really frustrated. And the frustrating thing about it is that these often would only take 10 seconds to meet. Thank you so much for everything you did to make that event a possibility. Like, we couldn't have done it without you. That's appreciation. Or acknowledgement and recognition could look something like, listen, you've been working here for about 3 years now. What do you think we should do? Now, the leadership might well go on in a different direction, but the person who's been invited to share their opinions, and it being done in an authentic way, will feel, okay, my opinions count here. And I think a third dynamic, which will always be present, is behind any resistance, there will be a deeply rooted need that's not being met. And we typically, an ineffective and unhelpful interpretation of resistance is that this is just someone who's a troublemaker. And a great example of what this can look like was my friend Mark Barrell, who was working in Northern California. I think it was with a county, like a local government. And there was somebody who was incredibly resistant, an older employee who was incredibly resistant to some new tech software. And this person just had a reputation for being a bit of a curmudgeon, a bit of a just kind of troublemaker, the kind of person who you know is always going to moan and complain. And because this employee was being, all of their actions were being interpreted through that lens, their hesitation and resistance to this new initiative was just dismissed as, well, he's just a miserable old whatever. What Mark did through listening and inviting his stories, and then recognize, okay, there's something deeper going on here, recognize that this particular employee was never comfortable with software and technology. And he was worried that he wasn't going to be able to learn quick enough. So by really listening, he was able to identify a capacity need. Okay, how can we support you in adapting this? This is the way in which we can. And it's like, it's recognized, it's immediately going in this, there's a deeply seated, deep rooted need here that is probably, for a variety of reasons, embarrassment, lack of confidence, not being expressed right now. So our job is to understand what is it, and then to accompany people as they help build that capacity to the point where they say, I'm able to do this and I'm confident to be able to do it.
Yeah, those are definitely crucial. What I find frustrating and interesting is when we explain these types of concepts, especially, thinking about like a large scale change in an organization, which is just a prime ground for conflict because it's change. And it's the immediate reaction and response is like, well, we can't possibly meet every single individual where they are. We don't have time for that. And it's, well, the time is going to be taken in other ways anyway.
It's the short term. It's the short term solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I have over the years become increasingly frustrated with one-off trainings. So like the conflict resolution training, and I've been brought in, whether it's as an individual consultant or working as a facilitator for an organization, being brought in to deliver a professional development conflict resolution. Often it's someone in HR looking through okay, we need professional development. Okay, we've not had conflict resolution for a while. Okay, what should we do? And so they bring someone like me in, and we'll give everyone a nice lunch. But because you've only got a certain amount of time, the emphasis tends to be on communication skills. So let's teach people how to listen. And so you'll do various listening exercises. This is all of it's valuable, but its value is when it's part of a much broader intervention and engagement. When you just focus on teaching people to listen better without dealing with some of the structural issues that are causing the conflicts in the first place, then what you end up with is more eloquent, pissed off people. And that's it. And it could be so much more. But it's like how do we kind of do that? And that's why I will always seek, when I'm working with people, to think, okay, if we're doing a 3-hour training or a day or whatever it is, let's build in follow-up conversations. Mm-hmm. Let's build in the kind of, because you'll see it often in mediation training when you'll have 25 employees going through a mediation program. They don't all need to be there. I guarantee you. There's maybe 2 or 3 who are going to be in a position that they will bring that in. So it's like you can do something else with the whole group. Have a conversation. Let's talk about how we come to decisions, those kind of things. But then focus on the 3 people who are in a position to actively be that third party in a conflict, and then build up their skills. And most of the time, they already have so many of the skills. What you're trying to do with something like mediation training, I think the more effective emphasis is on teaching people how to think like a mediator rather than the technical skills. They already have the technical skills. So it's like it's a lens. It's a way of understanding. I think that's where you can kind of, as facilitators, what we do is we encourage people to look. How do you look at that? Okay, how can you look at that in a different way? What are the kind of, the kind of little sunglasses or glasses where you can kind of clip a little magnetic lens on the front? I think that's what we're doing in training. We're like, well, let's look at it from a gender perspective. That could be, okay, you're planning to do this. You're planning to have this meeting at 4:00 in the afternoon. Okay. Typically, it's moms who are looking after kids. So if you're having it there when they're coming out of school, then you're automatically excluding certain people. That's just looking at it through a different lens. And that's what I think, with the variety of different identities and diverse experiences, our invitation is to try to see it through a different lens, because we don't exist in each other's realities. It's what I found over the years with my I'm a white male, the white British middle-aged middle-class male. And I like, when people, if someone was to say to me, and I was to invite them to share their story and experience of what it's like to live in a particular place or work in a particular context, and they were to say, And then in response, I would say, oh, I know exactly how you feel. There would be an instinctive distrust, and they would be right to. And I would strongly encourage everyone to be cautious around anyone who ever says, I know exactly how you feel. But the fact that our experiences is very different doesn't stop me being fully present as a human and listening to what they have to say. And that's about trust. I had an example working with a facilitated mediation, very, very complex organization, complex governance structure. And I was meeting in advance of the actual sessions. I was meeting with the participants. And at the end of the 15-minute conversation with one of them, this woman looked at me and she said, why should I trust you? And I remember thinking, okay, that's a really good question. And I just paused and I said, you've only met me for 15 minutes. There is no reason why you should trust me at this point in time. I need to earn your trust. And she smiled and she said, good answer.
Yeah, the beginning of trust build.
Yeah. Yeah, by not assuming that it's going to just, it needs to be earned. And that there's something about, it's a credibility thing. It's about not pretending to be someone you're not. And by being true to yourself and not pretending, it might mean that that trust takes a lot longer to build. But I guarantee once you've got it, you're going to have it forever. Unless you do something which breaks it.
Yeah, okay. And then you're going to lose it for a very long time. Or forever sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's like the same as what you're talking about in the beginning of creating that space and addressing basically the elephant in the room, making sure people like identify what has happened, up to this point. And there's some of that like authenticity of the room and trust in the room is based on being able to call that out or being able to call in that 15-minute conversation. Like, yeah, obviously there's going to be no trust here yet. You've just met me. This is what we'll see. We'll see where this goes. Rather than being like, well, here's my credentials. Here's three things that I've done. Here's what I really enjoy about it. I'm trying to justify it.
Yeah, and it's a power thing as well. It's recognizing, and I think you can do it. There's a lovely phrase that I got from when I was working in Northern Ireland about taking on the role of the naive outsider and being intentional about it. Not trying to pretend, oh, I know everything. It's like, say, I'm new around here. Like, tell me, what's it like to work here? Like, what's it like to live in your reality? And then inviting people to kind of fill in the gaps. The other thing about it that I think is really valuable is that there's humility. And I think this is one of the challenges with any analysis is we can go in as an outsider and say, okay, this is what you need to do. I think a more effective and humble and respectful approach is to say, this is how we've understood. We've listened to what's going on. We've tried to understand your context. Here are some ideas that we think will be effective in bringing about the change that you want to see in your organization. Tell me, what are the challenges you're going to face making that happen? So basically inviting people to critique your proposal, because people will then say, well, you didn't mention this and you haven't thought about this. And it's the respectful way. I've been, one of the things I'm working on at the moment is a book called How to Complain Effectively. And I think that it's rooted in countless observations of people complaining really, really badly. Essentially complaining, you're trying to bring about change. Now, I'll acknowledge, sometimes you just want to have a good moan. Sometimes I just want to complain. I don't want anything to change because I know it's not going to change. So I just want to moan. But when we do want to bring about change within an organization, within a community, then I think at the heart of it is paying attention to what's frustrating you in the first place. which is again the self-awareness, paying attention to recognize that, okay, I don't feel I'm being respected. I don't feel, and so it's helping you understand. Intentionally focusing on our frustrations can be incredibly valuable. What we then are invited to do is to try and understand what are we trying to put in its place. So that's about visioning. That's this vision. This is the difference. It's the difference between, are you familiar with the concept of backcasting?
I don't think so.
It's a way of kind of like a strategic planning. It's that forecasting is the current dynamics extended will lead to this. Backcasting is the idea of this is what we want to create. In 5 years' time, or 1 year from now, if we were coming in and we were observing as an organization really healthy dynamics, what would we see? Observable behaviors. And then it's working backwards. Okay, so if that's what we want in 1 year from now, what do we need to put in place in 10 months, 8 months? And so it's a much more intentional engagement with that. And I think to really transform and bring about that type of vision, the other part of complaining effectively is really deeply understanding where someone else is coming from and the resistance that your change is likely to encounter. And then again, avoidable naivety. Do your homework. Understand what they're coming from. Understand the challenges they think they're likely to meet. And then try and be one step ahead of them. To the point that the idea of in 20 plus years of doing this type of work, I've never met anyone who's changed their mind because they were told that they were wrong. Or that they can't look a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen people on regular occasions change their mind because someone's asked a question which helps shine a light on the contradiction or limitations of their argument. And it elicits oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that before.
Mm-hmm.
But that's empathy. It's a real deep respect. I really like the Latin words. I love etymology. It's so fascinating. Trust comes from the old Norse for strong, trauste.
Mm-hmm.
With respect, it's the Latin, and it's it's to do again, and spect is spectacles, spectator.
Mm-hmm.
So to respect is to look and to look again.
Mm-hmm.
Sincere is all about sincera,
Mm-hmm.
without wax. It's about the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
where marble was the kind of great commodity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you'd have unscrupulous marble merchants hiding flaws, cracks in the marble by putting wax in. So you wouldn't be able to see it. But then when you tried to build or sculpt with it, it would crack. So people started to look for marble that was sincera, without wax. So it's, but
So
yeah, the respect to real pay attention, to look and to look again, is built in empathy and understanding. And whilst also honoring your own vision for what you want to see is changed. It's both.
Yeah, fascinating. So to loop back to the beginning when you had electrician envy.
Yes.
Part of the electrician envy is, besides the easy way to just say like, this is what I do, I'm an electrician. Part of it's also I can understand that envy, because as an electrician, when you're hired to do a job, which typically is to turn on electricity or make it happen, you can measure the success. You can see the success before you leave because the lights are on, the fridge is on, it actually works, and then you can walk away.
Great point. Yeah.
And in the work you do, which is very similar to the work we do, we don't get to see.
We don't.
When it works, or how it works, or if it works.
It is. I gave a talk, a TED style talk a few years ago called Building Peace You May Never See. And I used the analogy of a cathedral. So York Minster is a big cathedral in just a few miles from where I grew up. It took 252 years to build. So the people who came up with the idea, the architects, the people who initially paid for it, and the vast majority of people who built it never saw it completed. And for the last 800 years, people have just maintained something that someone else built. I think there's a great beauty to that. I think what we do, and it's going back to this concept of intentionality, we intentionally create the space in which something might happen, whilst acknowledging that we might never know what it is. And because we know that, our invitation is to focus on what that space looks like. So we know, in terms of measuring, we know, okay, we can't measure, we don't know exactly. We might get someone who's and it will regularly happen where someone who, and it's always greatly appreciated, where someone comes up and says, thank you so much. That was great. Really valued it. But there might be someone for whom the real value they gained from this learning space, collaborative learning space, came months later. So we might not know that, but we know, and the emphasis and invitation and opportunity for us from a facilitator point of view, and that's not just us as formal, it's anyone here who's trying to shape a space, is to focus, okay, we know that we need to create a space that is collaborative, that is an invitation for people, that is respectful of diverse styles. And that's where we're trying to focus. We focus on the space and we trust that something will emerge. And we then, that's why I like an ongoing rather than just a one-off conversation, because you can track it over time. It's sustained, authentic change is a process. It's not just a one-off. The one-off things, the kind of the workshops where success is measured in attendance lists and photo opportunities, I don't think there is a huge amount of really sustainable change present within those dynamics.
Photo opportunities. Yes.
They look great.
Yes. Look at everybody smiling.
Yeah, and then it's also with like an evaluation where someone with you can end an evaluation that's given 5 minutes before the end of the workshop. It's like 5 out of 5. How do you 5 great? It's then immortalized in a report, and it's fun enough. It's purely motivated by the stated end time is 12 o'clock and it's 11:57. And one thing I've learned in the US is that you can start slightly late the workshop, but under no circumstances whatsoever can you ever go past the stated end time. It is culturally insensitive, inappropriate, and disrespectful.
Indeed. Yeah, we were just giving actually a very short workshop, which is not typically what we do. And we knew we were going to run late. Like we realized, like we could cut stuff off, and we did cut some stuff off, and we're going to need an extra 5-6 minutes to actually wrap things up. And so as soon as before the stated time, we actually asked for permission. We gave them the option, like, listen, like there's a couple of more minutes and it's up to you. We can end at 9:30 or we can end at 9:35. Right. It's up to you.
But that's ownership. That's it.
Wow. Yeah. But it's true. You can start late, but you can never. We usually try to end early, actually, on purpose because of that. That's
the other. I think a challenge in terms of creating that space is to be honest about what's possible within a particular space. Yeah. And less is often more. Are you like, can you? Yeah. And I've learned to be honest in what I share with as a consultant or in a workshop with a client, this is what's possible. No, I can't do this. Someone else might say that they can cover all of that. Fair enough.
Yeah. They'll lecture you for an hour and a half. They'll cover the information.
Cover all those. We can do these learning objectives, and we can do it in this amount of time. It's like, I personally don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
This is what we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that takes a lot of courage and authenticity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have to play this whole conversation for everybody we help try and train as facilitators too, because this is all really eloquent ways of describing what we've tried to help people understand on like, hey, what is it about facilitation that is creating a space? What is it about like flexing enough with the room, helping guide some of the conversation without guiding a full agenda? How do you do these things, and how do you have the confidence to do those things? And I really appreciate your perspective on this, Michael, because it's helped clarify a lot for me, and this is what we've been trying to help people understand for a couple months now.
Yeah, or longer. Yes,
or longer.
So, last couple of questions, because I'm sure we could talk for months and weeks on end. What does authenticity mean to you?
It is about the quality of presence. It's about being fully present as best we can. And that's paying attention to where are my thoughts right now? My distractions. In terms of listening, it's thinking about, okay, am I listening, or am I actually just waiting for a pause and then I'm going to jump in? It's about sitting in discomfort. And I think that's one of the challenges with the kind of text-based communication. When someone texts, "I'm sorry," it's basically getting them off the hook. Whereas being authentic and listening and sitting in the discomfort of, this feels really uncomfortable, but I'm here and I'm fully here. And it's not easy. It's really, really not easy. But authenticity is about the quality of presence.
I love that definition. It is. All that. And so where can people find you? There's going to be a book coming out and many other things. So.
And now that I've said it, it 100% has to. I'm holding myself. It's in process.
Nothing like putting it out in the ether.
So two places I'll show. One is in terms of my consulting and coaching work is catalysten.net. So that's CATLYSTEN.net. And that I came on that name because everything starts with listening. Listening is the catalyst for all change. So catalysten.net is where you can find me in terms of consulting and coaching. And then my own personal website, which is a collection of various things, various talks I've given, articles I've written, etc., is simply my name. It's michaelfryer.com. That's MICHAELFRYER.com.
And we'll have all these in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. Now we can tell your brother that you've been on the podcast.
Exactly. Very happy. Well, thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much, Alex. I love the conversations that you've had with people. I love the kind of the focal point, the invitation to really kind of pay attention to these dynamics about values. And it's a real honor, privilege to be part of it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, great conversation. Tons of learning. So thank you. Great first Monday morning thing. And thank you, everybody, for listening.